tonight we are going to make some spaghetti and meatballs, except not with spaghetti, but with some fusilini bucati, and a homemade, husband's making fun of the way I pronounced it, which is totally wrong, by the way. And then I've got some, this is a half sourdough, half yeast focaccia, so it's a half and half, but it is extra bubbly. So we're gonna do our little dimples on it, sprinkle it with some deliciousness, and then we'll make some homemade meatballs. So the trick to getting that really chewy but crispy crust on it is you gotta use a good amount of oil. So we're gonna drizzle a couple tablespoons of oil over the top of it. I already used a lot of oil to stretch it out into our pan here, but you gotta have a little bit more on here. And now we're gonna go in with the dimples, which is my favorite, which is giving you these nice crispy craters in our focaccia. There we go. Okay, and one more. It's like my favorite thing to do. So much fun. Let me wash my hands because they're nice and oily now. There we go. And then we are going to coat this with lots of delicious spices. Number one being garlic salt on the hierarchy of spices. This is the best. So nice little coating over it. My kids really love a really kind of nice salty crust to it. Here we go. I'm getting down to the very end of this one, but don't worry, I have a whole nother one. Do not fear. And I have a backup for that one as well. Okay, and then we're gonna add some Italian spices over the top of this. Add just a nice little flair. Rosemary is also wonderful. It's like if I wasn't doing like a garlic cheese bread theme with our dinner tonight, kind of like spaghetti and breadsticks type idea, I would totally use rosemary because it's delicious with focaccia. But let's give a nice sprinkle over the top here. Good coating. And then, perfect. We're gonna go pop this in my oven at 400 degrees. It's going to bake up nice and hot, or not 400, 450. Nice and hot. It's a sourdough / yeast, so it's a half and half. It's a hybrid. So you want it to get that nice kind of crispy shell on it. So high heat is perfect for this. I'm gonna set my timer for 24 minutes. That way I can come peek on it, but it takes around 24, 25 minutes to get that perfect kind of golden brown, crunchy, chewy deliciousness. Okay, let's get our pasta going in our water here. So I'm using fusilli bucati, which are like almost like if you were to take a spaghetti noodle and wrap it around a pencil, it would be like a nice little spiral. These are what they kind of look like. They're actually kind of really cool looking noodles. So we're going to use these today because I don't ever have any just plain spaghetti noodles. I buy a 6-pack and when they're gone, it's like 6 months before I buy another 6-pack of them. So we're going to give these a quick little toss in here and mix them around. I always like to stir it as soon as I go into the water so that they don't stick to the bottom of my pot. And we're gonna boil them up until a perfect little al dente. And while those are cooking here, let's get our meatballs let's dice up our onion and get that one going, sauteing, kind of caramelizing. And then we'll make our meatballs to pop in the oven because they won't take too long to bake up. But we can at least have our onions caramelized by then so we can work on the next step of our sauce. Okay, so I'm going to do a nice kind of small dice on here for this so that they'll kind of just disappear into our sauce, but will be lovely. There we go. And I find when you make the vegetables smaller, my kids will eat them more without complaint than when they're bigger. Bigger chunks are noticeable, smaller chunks are not. There we go. And you want to use like a yellow or a Val Dahlia sweet onion. Pass on the red onions or the white onions. They're just not gonna have the right flavors for our spaghetti. There we go. And then we'll get these guys in some olive oil toasting up nicely, which I have right over here. So I'm going to use my big 6-quart saute pan. So I'm going to put about 2 tablespoons simply because it's so big. And I'm going to heat this over about a 5, so a medium heat, to kind of toast these guys up. There we go. And just lay this right out here. Let me grab a little spatula here. We're going to coat our onions up in the olive oil, and then we'll let them saute. Get a nice caramelization. Bring out their natural sweetness, which will help with the sauce. Okay. While we're waiting for those to start sauteing, I've got 2 slices of bread, which we are going to soak in some heavy cream, because this is going to be the base for our panade, which is going to be the binder for our meatball. So you're just going to pour enough cream over it to make the bread soggy, but I don't want it to be dripping with liquid, because you don't want your base to be too runny, or it won't bind your meatballs together as well.
Yeah, question. How was the cake?
It was wonderful. As you can see, it's been halfway eaten over there. I kept trying to just like smack little hands away all day because they were trying to pick at it as soon as I brought it out of the fridge. But it was delicious. And I hit the chocolate frosting was really good. And of course, all the kids loved the Kit Kat bars around the base of it. So it was definitely, I mean, we've eaten half of it. Now, granted, we had, how many? Like 11 or 12 people over. So it was a pretty big taste, but it was delicious. You can actually see, I'll bring it over here. We've got all of these nice chocolatey layers in the middle. It's pretty massive. So I don't know how we're gonna eat this. I'm already kind of in a sugar coma from it, but it was good. Okay, we've got 2 eggs in here with our 2 slices of bread that we soaked up in our olive oil, or not our olive oil, in our cream. And we're gonna add in about a teaspoon of dried basil, a teaspoon of dried oregano, and then I'm gonna go grab my Italian spices over here. We're gonna add in about a teaspoon of dried Italian spices, maybe a teaspoon and a half, a little bit more, because we gotta season up all of our ground beef and add a little extra to the Italian sausage. And then we're gonna add in about a teaspoon of garlic salt, which this is like, that was like a 1/4 of a teaspoon. But do not fear, always have backups, and backups for backups. Okay, so we're gonna add in about a teaspoon of this, and then some onion powder. And then we're gonna kind of mix it together, and then we're gonna add in our meat, and then just kind of work it together. So, let's get, here we go. And then our onion powder, about a teaspoon and a half. And before I start working through with my hands, before they get too messy, let me grab out a baking sheet for our meatballs. Okay, now I'm gonna just go in. The best way to do this is with your hands and just get in there and squeeze your fingers through the bread and the egg, and you're just going to make this nice thick paste. It's called a panade, and that's going to be the binder for our meatballs. And this works so much better than breadcrumbs. I feel like breadcrumbs give you a really dry and spongy meatball. This is going to give you a really tender and moist and just a perfect meatball. Here we go. And especially using the cream, has a bit of fat in it, which is just makes your meatballs, again, more tender. Okay, I've got these. Now we're gonna add in a pound of ground beef and a pound of Italian sausage. And I'm using just mild Italian sausage. So we have 2 pounds of meat here. And you're just gonna go through and we're gonna work our hands through our meat and our panade until everything comes together in one cohesive mixture. And this is our binder. That panade's gonna bind the 2 meats together. And then we can roll these out into balls and pop them in the oven to bake up. And then we'll throw them in our sauce at the end. A couple smash downs. But you wanna make sure you get the ground beef and the Italian sausage mixed together.
Deborah went out and bought that rug.
Oh yeah, it's a steal. I love it, it's great. It's nice because even if you splash on it from washing the dishes, it cleans up really nicely. And it was what, I think 11.97 or something, so like $12 from Home Depot. To me is a win.
Can you go over how many eggs and bread?
So yes, so 2 eggs and 2 slices of a soft bread. So I'm just using like a soft honey wheat bread in here for 2 pounds of meat. So my rule of thumb when I'm making any of my meatballs, regardless of whether it's Italian meatball or whatnot, is for every pound of meat, I use 1 egg and 1 slice of bread. And I find that to be the perfect amount of binder to hold the meatballs together without diluting them out too much. Because if you use even more meat, that's where you're gonna get a drier meatball that is more spongy versus a really tender meatball. There we go. So I've got this to be just about perfect. And as you can see, we've created one big kind of cohesive meat ball here that we're gonna make into smaller ones. So let me stir this. And I always like to mix with just one hand. This allows me to keep my other hands clean to be able to work and do other things. Okay, let's move this guy over here. And we're gonna start shaping up our meatballs to go into our pasta. So we're gonna do just like ping pong ball size on here. That way they'll cook up fairly quickly in our oven. Now, sometimes I make jumbo meatballs, sometimes I make super mini ones. Just knowing the smaller the meatball, the faster it will cook up, and vice versa, the bigger the meatball, the longer it takes. I find ping pong ball ones, they are gonna shrink up a little bit, but they stay nice and tender and juicy without getting too overdone on the outside. Now with the bigger ones, you have to cook them a little longer, which means they form more of a crust on them. There we go. Get these guys shaped up. And I also don't do too small because to make small meatballs, that means you have a lot of meatballs to make. And I used to always start, and towards the end, my meatballs would always get bigger and bigger because I was tired of rolling them. Now I've gotten pretty good where they are about the same size, roughly, every single time. I don't measure them, per se. But you don't want to go and vary in their size too much so that they all kind of cook up and get the perfect cooking at about the same time. There we go. Now, sometimes at Thanksgiving, I will make spaghetti and meatballs for my family. And this is making spaghetti and meatballs for like 40 people. That's a lot of meatballs to roll out. But once you've made homemade meatballs, you can't go back to like frozen store-bought ones because they just taste so much better. And it's really not that much work to whip them out. I will say it takes like 10 minutes to get a batch of meatballs in the oven baking up, but they're just so delicious. And this is something that freezes down really well where you can pre-bake these and then you can just pop them in the freezer and then whip up some spaghetti and meatballs throughout the week or throw them in a soup. I will say the recipe stands up well in the freezer. This is something back when I used to work outside of the home. I would prep these up over the weekend. I used to do like a big cook along, like cooking day on Sunday, and prep up a lot of meals for the week. And meatballs are one of those ones that I could prep up and have and pull out the meatballs and whatnot. Okay, just a few more to roll these guys. And then I'll wash my hands and we'll pop them in the oven.
And can you go over what the meat mixture is?
Yes, so it is a pound of ground beef with a pound of Italian sausage. And then we use 2 eggs, 2 slices of bread, enough cream to make the bread soggy. And then we have Italian spices, basil, oregano, garlic, salt, onion powder. Wash my hands real quick. Okay. And then we're gonna go pop this in the oven. I'm gonna give my onions a quick stir and my noodles a quick stir. And we'll grab this to go into the oven.
And how was the lunch soup?
Oh, it was delicious. It was so good. It was just a fun take on, oh, look how beautiful this is. I'm gonna turn and put my focaccia down a layer so my meatballs can be on top. And this is going to allow my focaccia to not get as dark, but continue to cook under too. I'm gonna slide this guy out, but look how beautiful this guy is looking. Gorgeous. So that is my half sourdough, half yeast focaccia. There we go. And those will bake up. The focaccia will be done in about 10 minutes, and those meatballs should be almost ready around them because we are cooking them at a pretty high heat. Okay, I'm gonna first test my noodles here, but these are just fun little noodles. I always feel like they're like my Shirley Temple noodles because they've got the cute little corkscrew kind of tendrils that she was known for. And these are actually done. Perfect timing. Now I'm not going to be using any of my water in my pasta sauce. If I was going to use it, I would salt it first, but since I'm not going to use it because we have a marinara based sauce, I'm just gonna dump it. Now the trick with your noodles, because I always mix my noodles into my pasta sauce, is you want to cook them to an al dente or just a smidge before al dente so that they can absorb up all of that lovely, juices in your sauce. Gives the noodles more flavor. Okay, got this heating up here. And now let's get our sweet peppers in here. We've got sweet pepper, zucchini, and mushrooms. So we're kind of doing a little bit of a veggie ragu as well. And then we'll throw in some little extra spices. And then we'll use our good old Rayo's marinara sauce. We're kind of keeping it really simple today because that's the way Jack likes it. This is this is one of my kids' favorite meals. I think because it's a very simple flavor profile. It's comfort food, it's delicious. This is something that every one of my kids loves. And I have very few meals that every single one of my kids love because there's always a dissenter among the group. And it's funny, growing up I never quite understood that, even though I'm the youngest of 10. My mom had 7 and I have 3 older half-brothers. But I always remember her growing up and she'd always like, I can't make everybody happy. She goes, there's somebody's always going to be unhappy with the meal. And I never really understood. I was like, oh no, we all like the same things. But there's always one kid who doesn't like something. But spaghetti and meatballs is one of those ones that is a family favorite. That and steak. But who doesn't love steak? Okay, let's get these up. I'm doing a pretty small dice on my peppers, just kind of like with my onions, because I want them to really blend into my sauce without them standing out. Again, when you make them nice and small like this, the kids don't notice them as well and they happily eat the vegetables. Versus if I make them bigger, then they kind of pick them out. So mincing them up nice. They'll also get nice and tender quickly this way as well.
You have a question. Did you cook a lot while camping?
We did, well, this time we didn't cook as much as I did over the summer. We just did breakfasts because we kind of were out and about until like 9 and 10 o'clock at night. So we ended up eating like at Dollywood and at Anakista and out and about while we're there. But we did breakfasts every single day of our camping trip. Lots of, my kids really love like campfire pancakes, and then my basic kind of sausage, bacon, eggs. It's one of their favorite. I brought like a little container of sourdough discard with so I can make my sourdough pancakes, which is one of their favorites. And I don't know what it is about camping, but my pancakes, I can make the exact same recipe here in my house, but for some reason when I'm camping, they get so big and fluffy. Just must be like the heat or something, but it's just, they're so good. And then that first night when we got to our campsite, I cooked steaks. And then I always grew up calling them like potato hobos, but you like dice up potatoes, onions, peppers, you throw them in aluminum foil with butter and seasoning, and you cook them in the coals. So good. Okay, we've got our peppers and our onions in here. You can see we've got this lovely kind of caramelization forming on our onions, which are delicious. It's gonna make them nice and sweet. And now I'm gonna kind of slice up my mushrooms nice and thin. I got some baby bellas here, and we'll pop them in there and let them kind of start sauteing as well. There we go. I'm going to try to do kind of a rougher chop on them so that they are nice and small bits to it. Okay. And then we'll go over them a couple more times. And then I have 2 small zucchinis that we're going to dice up as well and throw them into our sauce. Again, just making some smaller chunks to it so that they kind of blend in a little bit more. Although the mushrooms, I'll leave a little bit bigger because I do just love a good mushroom. There we go. Okay. I'm going to turn up to about a 5 now, and we're going to throw in our mushrooms. There we go. I'll let these guys saute, kind of mix them in. I want a little bit of a higher heat on them so they get a nice little kind of sear on them. But you want to make sure you stir them up well. Mushrooms are like little sponges, so they're going to really suck up all of that residual oil in there. And so just make sure you coat them well. Okay, I've got 2 little zucchinis here that I am going to cut the tops and bottoms off, and then I'm going to dice them up so that you have nice little small bits of zucchini in our sauce, but it's not going to be super noticeable. So kind of giving it a nice little vegetable ragu. There we go. And the nice thing about zucchini is I find it's a really good introductory vegetable because it really just picks up the flavors of everything else without adding too much of an additional flavor. You know, it's kind of like a sponge. There we go. Pop these in. And then we'll add some spices. And then lastly, we'll finish off with a little bit of our marinara sauce. And then just do a couple chopped over it. Because again, we're kind of making like a chopped ragu base for this. And add this in. And we'll give this a nice kind of coating. And I might add a smidge of butter in here, but I'm going to see how it looks when I put it in there. Again, Zucchini has a bit more water than the mushrooms, but the mushrooms kind of absorbed up a lot of that flavor, but I might add a little bit of butter to add a little bit of richness to it. So just about a teaspoon or so of butter, or a teaspoon and a half. And we'll put it in here. Just make sure you mix it all the way around so it can kind of coat up those that zucchini and those mushrooms. And this will add a nice little richer flavor to it. There we go. Beautiful. And then I'm just going to use my spoon to break up any pieces that are kind of big. Again, smaller is better. Okay, I'm going to spread this out. And then I'm going to sprinkle my spices over it, but I'm not going to mix them in right away. I'm going to allow them to steam up and hydrate, which will really allow those flavors to come out. So we're going to use, again, almost all the same spices that we used in our meatball. I'm going to sprinkle a little bit of oregano over the top, just a nice little dusting. So we want to season up these vegetables. So probably about a half a teaspoon or so. And then we're going to do some dried basil. And again, like a half a teaspoon or so. Sprinkle it around. And then we're going to add in some Italian seasoning. About a half a teaspoon or so. Good sprinkle around. And a little bit of onion powder. This is going to allow it to really kind of coat up all those vegetables and add a great flavor. About a teaspoon of this, so a little bit more. And then we're going to add just a smidge of garlic salt. We don't need to add too much because our marinara already has a good amount in it, but we want to make sure these vegetables have a good flavor on it. Okay. While those are steaming up, let's go grab our focaccia out because last time I looked, it was almost, it's beeping now as we walk over there. Okay. I'm going to test my meatballs. Ooh, you know, those are done too, so we can actually grab both of these while we're here. I'm going to grab my focaccia first. But you see how putting it underneath our baking sheet allowed it to continue cooking without covering, getting it too dark on top. If you don't have stuff anything baking, you can easily just put some aluminum foil over it so you don't have a super dark crust. And then I'm going to grab our meatballs as well since they're done. And the meatballs cook up fast because that oven was at 450 and these aren't super huge. And the way you can tell your meatballs are done is when you touch them, they should be nice and firm. They shouldn't go in. If they go in, they're still undercooked. And you need to cook them a little longer. And then we have, again, our beautiful focaccia over here. This is my mix of sourdough and yeast. So I only had about 2 hours on it, so I added a little yeast to give it an extra poof on it. But it has my sourdough starter in it as well. But we seasoned it with Italian spices and garlic salt, so we'll have this nice kind of garlic breadstick kind of texture flavor to it. But it will be delicious. There we go. So I'm mixing in our dried herbs that we sprinkled over our veggies here. And as you can see, they're all starting to cook up nicely. Our zucchini is starting to get a little translucent, which means we are ready to add in our marinara sauce. So we're going to start. Got it. So this is a big 32-inch jar, so I'm not sure if I'll need more than this, but I'm going to add the first one in. Give it a good shake. We're going to mix it down. Turn your temperature all the way down to low. Marinara is a very thick sauce that will bubble if you put it in there and heat it too long. Here we go. So we're gonna mix this in. I might add not a full jar, but a smidge bit more of our sauce, and then we're gonna add our meatballs in. And then last, I swear, sometimes these jars are so hard. I'm just gonna add in about a half of my jar of marinara. I will say, homemade marinara sauce is delicious and great, but who has the time for that? I will say I love Rayo's marinara. I think I discovered them like a year, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. What I really love about them is they don't have a crazy amount of spices, and this is just the basic marinara. They're not super sweet. They're just really simple, and they taste as close to my homemade marinara sauce, but I don't have to spend all day over the stove making it. And you know, I always say in cooking, I like to throw out and make a homemade meal, homemade meatballs, but there are some things that you can just buy from the store that work a little bit better, makes life a little bit easier. Okay, let me taste my sauce, and we're gonna throw in our meatballs as long as it doesn't need anything else. And then we'll toss in our noodles. Delicious. Okay, let's get our meatballs in here. I'm sure this tray is still hot, so I'm gonna get my one on. We're gonna put them in, and then we're just gonna dip them underneath the sauce to coat them. And this is going to allow them to stay nice and moist and tender and juicy. There we go. So just pop them all in here. And these are our homemade meatballs made with ground beef and Italian sausage, eggs, bread, spices, deliciousness. There we go. Got them all in there. Put this guy over here. We're gonna mix these guys up. Again, dip them under. Gotta submerge them so they don't dry out. Perfect. Now, if you were going to make these ahead and just keep your meatballs, just let them come to cool down, and then you can put them either in like a storage container or a Ziploc baggie and pop them in the freezer. Just squeeze all that extra air out. But they are wonderful. Okay, we've got our marinara sauce in here. Now, the best thing, regardless of what pasta you use, put your noodles in here. Now, it's gonna start off like a big wedge, but once you start mixing it into your sauce, it's going to break apart and coat it. And this is why you wanna cook your noodles to about an al dente or right before an al dente so that they can soak up the extra flavor of our sauce. Whoop, I'm flying over the edge here. There we go. I feel like growing up, we always had spaghetti and it was never meatballs. It was always just like a ground beef sauce. And you always kept your noodles separate and you had them in 2 bowls. And what always would happen is your noodles would form one giant kind of noodle base ball. And they were never great the next day. Mix them into your sauce. And this spaghetti and meatballs, I always think tastes even better the next day. It flavors the noodles so well. It keeps them tender without sticking to each other, and really just makes those flavors just meld and work together. But these are, again, they're so cute. They're like the Shirley Temple of spaghetti. They've got their little ringlets curls. You know, it actually kind of reminds me, and this is kind of weird, SpaghettiOs. I'm getting a SpaghettiO vibe from this. I don't know if anybody had those growing up. I sure did. Much better than SpaghettiOs, but here we go. We are done. We made this like super quick. So I'm gonna flip my cutting board over so we can pop out our focaccia. We can cut a nice good piece of that up and serve up our dinner. I'm gonna turn off my sauce. Bring this guy over here. Help if I put them on the right hand. That way I can flip this guy out. Here we go. Yeah. Am I gonna have to get my little spatula? Let's see. It's actually not too hot. There we go. Beautiful. Look how this is the beautiful crispy edge on it. You guys can see that's where you gotta coat all sides of it in that olive oil, because focaccia is known for that soft center but that crunchy crust. And now we can cut it You hear that? Lovely. So you've got, again, super soft, but just beautiful crunchy crust. Let's serve up our dinner, guys. Let's do it in a bowl because how often do I get to use my pasta bowls for pasta? Not nearly enough. Okay. So let me grab my shovel. Your kitchen utensils are not complete unless you have a kitchen shovel. And we've got a Parmesan cheese that we'll top it off with. Okay, for dinner tonight, we have our fusilli bucati noodles, which are these cute little spirals. And then we made a wonderful homemade meatballs using Italian sausage and ground beef, and we seasoned them up with oregano, basil, Italian seasoning, garlic, salt, and onion powder. We're gonna coat it with some shaved Parmesan over the top. And then of course, we will serve it with a nice slice of our homemade sourdough and yeast focaccia that we seasoned with garlic, salt, and Italian seasoning for just a nice crunchy, crispy, delicious bread that we can dip into our marinara sauce that is full of zucchini, mushrooms, onions, and sweet peppers. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining us here today. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I try to do live cooking shows every single day, kind of show you what we're making for our family and hopefully teach you guys something along the way. Again, we do upload all of our videos to the link on our page, so if you ever want to recreate any of these recipes at home, you can just go to that link, search for what we made. So we've got our curly spaghetti and meatballs with our focaccia, and you can always watch and cook along with me again. We also have a link to our Amazon storefront that has all of our different cooking gear and gadgets. I've got my all-clad 6-quart saute pan in there, my knives, my cutting boards, all the different gadgets I use in the kitchen I have in there for you guys to check out. But again, thank you so much for joining.